Hello everyone, we are from Team 2C. My name is Emir, together with Afra, Kars, Dirk, and Tiffany. Today we're going to present about the topic extension of last week lectures. So for the topic extension, we choose about the agency theory. So let's get started. Before we start this presentation, let me explain about the outline of these presentations. So this presentation will be divided into 6 main parts. First of all, I'm going to explain about a brief informations about the agency theory as it's discussed on the lecture. Then I will talk about the 3 types of agency problem that may arise in a company. Then Afra will talk about the causes of the agency problem and also regarding to the alternative theory in regards to the agency theory. The last part of the presentation is Stephanie will going to explain about the remedies of the agency problem, and she will also talk about the criticism of the theory. So basically, the agency theory explains that problem arise when the managers and shareholders have different goals. The agency theory, also known as the principal agent problem, arise when the principal pays the agent for performing certain action that are useful to the principal and costly to the agent. From this first problem, we could see that the principal have to fulfill their self-interest while forgetting about their agent because they see their agent is only a mode for the principal to gain their self-interest. The second general problem is that the principal have some difficulties to fully observe their agent. Because it is difficult to observe the agents, they could not distinguish between the good and bad agents or between done and done right. It is also related to the effort invested, the time horizon, the risk, and the asset use. The next thing is that there are 3 main costs that is incurred by the principal or also known as the agency cost. The first one is the bonding cost. The bonding cost means that it is the cost that is incurred by the principal in order to establish a relationship with the agent. The second one is the residual cost. It is the cost that is incurred by the principal of what the agent did and what the principal would have done. So basically, there are differences in their expectation if we're talking about the residual cost. And the last one is the monitoring cost. So the monitoring cost is a cost incurred by the principal in order to mitigate the loss from their agent. Basically, they do monitor their agent in order because they have the different goal. And the last one is that agency costs increase with information asymmetry and uncertainty. There are 3 types of agency problem. So it is distinguished as type 1, type 2, and type 3 agency problem. As you can also see from these slides, it shows the relationship between the principal and also the agent. The first type of the agency problem is between the principal or the owners with the agent or the managers. It is the most common type of the agency problem because this type of problem arise due to the separation of ownership from control was found since the birth of the large corporations. In this type of agency problem, there is a clash of interest between the principal and the agent. This is also due to the fact that the lack of monitoring from the principal to the agent leads to conflict, also known as the principal agent conflict. The second type of the agency problem is also known as the principal problem. This kind of problem is usually between the majority owners and the minority owners. We define majority owners as a person who have hold a majority of the shares of a firm, while we define the minor owner as the person who hold a very less portion of the firm's shares. Usually, the conflict in the principal problem arise because the majority owner have a higher voting rate in a company rather than the minor owner. Therefore, it is hard for the minority owner to hold their rights. Finally, the last type of the agency problem is known as the principal creditor problem. It is usually caused by the financing decision taken by the shareholders, and this conflict between the owners and creditors arises usually on a project, while it is risky and requires.
As we continue on to the causes of agency problems, each one of the three causes presented in the slides is related to a particular type of causes of agency problems, whether it is principal agent problem, principal problem, or principal creditor problem. The first one is the duration of involvement, which causes the principal agent problem. See, the agent might work for a shorter duration in the organization than the principal. The managers, the agents, work for the organization for a limited period, whereas the principal are the inseparable part of the firms. For the agents try to maximize their benefit within their limited stay. The agents might expropriate assets for their own personal benefit just to get the job done. For example, by using the company's budget that might be otherwise be used to get the job done right by maybe investing it somewhere else. Basically, the agents just want to get their job done, be done with their contract, and move to another firm. The next one is risk preference, which causes both the principal agent problem and the principal creditor problem. The parties involved in the organization are having different risk perceptions because they both have different objectives. Where the difference lies, again, between getting the job done and getting the job done right. In the case of the principal agent problem, the manager is bound or tied to the company for their income. So the managers might be less inclined to choose an optimal decision when there are more risks involved, hence why they're assumed to be risk averter. They prefer to make a decision that produces lower returns as long as the risks are known, whereas the shareholders are called risk seeker, as they are willing to make riskier decisions or investment because they are well diversified. The success or failure of this high risk investment that the shareholders make is going to create conflict with the creditor, which causes the principal creditor problem. See, if the investment fails, the creditor are bound to share some of the losses, and a lot of problems might persist because of this. And even if the investment turns out to be a success, the creditor will only get the fixed rate of interest, making the amount of interest they get limited. And the last one is decision making, which causes the principal problem. Majority shareholders take decisions in the firms, while the minority shareholders only follow it. It can create agency problem for the minority shareholders as the majority shareholders' interest might conflict with theirs. The decisions taken by the management could be in the exclusive interest of the majority shareholders and in disregard of the minority shareholders' interest. See, shareholders might also be faced with majority shareholders that are incompetent. Research that we found, this type of agency problem is also called expropriation problem, as the dominant owner managers, the majority shareholders, often tend to deprive minority shareholders and sometimes other investors of their fair share of income from corporate resources by channeling those resources to their own account. Here we can see that the majority shareholders are acting at their own best interest while disregarding the interests of the minority shareholders. So, moving on to the alternative theory, we have stakeholder theory. The agency theory, there's an assumption that the interests of principals and agents are diverged. The whole thing between getting the job done and getting the job done right. It basically focuses exclusively on interest of shareholders. However, in this stakeholder theory, It concentrates on the interests of all the parties and the corporation. Also, according to the stakeholder theory, the objective of corporate existence is not for the shareholders only. So it is changing the objective of corporate governance from maximizing the interests of shareholders, according to the agency theory, into maximize the value of the company. The stakeholder theory suggests that other individuals and parties, which are groups of constituents who have a legitimate claim on the firm, should also be considered as stakeholders. The stockholders, creditors, managers, employees, customers, suppliers, local communities, and the general public. In the stakeholder theory, each of these groups, the stakeholders I just mentioned, can be seen as supplying the firm with critical resources or contribution. In exchange, each would expect its interest to be satisfied. So the power of corporate is redistributed in the process of game among stakeholders. It is a game of supply and demand, where it will all be beneficial for each other because the stakeholder theory aims to maximize the benefits for all. It is seeing all the interests of stakeholders as a collective rather than diverge as agency theory suggests. There will be a continuous cycle inside these stakeholders where they will contribute to the firm and they will ask in exchange for their interests to be satisfied, rather than in the agency theory where the principal pays the agent for performing certain acts that are useful for the principal but costly to the agent. There will always be that problem with it. The agent wants it to get done and the principal wants it to get done right because there will always be a conflict of interest.
So, how to reduce agency problem in firms? First, it can be done through managerial ownership. It is basically granting stocks to agents to increase their affiliation to the firm. So, agents or managers, they will work as owners in the organization and become more motivated to increase the firm's performance. This will align both owners and managers' interest. Second is through executive compensation. It is basically a periodic compensation revision and proper incentive package. This will help hinder managers to act in their own self-interest of using the principal's wealth for private benefits. It can also motivate managers to work harder for the better performance of the firm, which can maximize the wealth of the owners as well. Third is through payment of debt. It is a periodic payment of debt service charge and principal amount to the creditors. This will help make managers become more cautious in taking inefficient decisions as it may hamper the profitability of the firm. This will serve as a discipline mechanism for managers, especially if the manager's salaries are tied closely to the firm's performance. Fourth is the board of directors. The inclusion of more outside and independent directors on board to help diligently watch actions of managers and help align interests between owners and the managers. So as we all know, the agency problem can be solved through monitoring, and this method is pretty much like the monitoring system with the addition of board members. Last but not least is through dividends. It is basically distributing profit as dividends, which can help decrease the agency problem since dividend distribution decreases the internal funds of the firm so that the firm has to attract external funds for finance. And that managers are pressured or pushed to make the firm perform better to allure the market participants. So these are the 5 ways in which we can reduce the agency problem in the firms, aside from making full contract and monitoring systems. So the criticism of the agency theory comes from Perrow in 1986. It was called the stewardship theory, where he criticized that it was too focused on the agent side. He believes that the theory is unconcerned towards the principals who deceive, shirk, and exploit agents. So Pero thought that the humans are noble and they work ethically for the betterment of the firm. Agents are unknowingly dragged into work with perilous working environment without any scope for encouragement where principals act as opportunistic. So I put an example of an article from The Atlantic where the title states that how shareholders are winning the American business. But what I'd like to focus on here is the one that I have highlighted in this page. It stated that executive pay packages for staff with stock options and a newly restive breed of professional investors began goading boards into pushing out managers whenever a company's stock price languished. So this is where bank executives during the time regularly point to return on equity or return on shareholders that matters the most. So shareholders here were very profit driven, very profit oriented. So this was the times where the shareholder value became such a big doctrine in the US. And it also shows from the article that the performance of the stock market since the shareholder value became doctrine in the 1990s has been disappointing. So it's just very interesting because previously with the agency theory, it has always been focused on the agents working at their own self-interest. How shareholders don't know what the managers they're dealing with, and that agents just want things to be done and not done right, since it is at the expense of the principal. But here it proves otherwise. It shows how principals may act opportunistic in increasing the shareholder value, and once managers can't meet the expectations, they are pushed out of the company as seen here, which just proves, according to the stewardship theory, that principals act opportunistic and that they exploit agents in this case because of their high profit driven motive. So from this criticism, it's just um, a nice outlook into the theory of the agency theory, where the agency theory was more focusing on the agent side, and then from the stewardship theory, it proves it gives out another conflicting theory where it's not all just about managers because sometimes the principal can be at the wrong too in this case. So that is all from the topic extension team. I hope you learned something from this presentation and thank you for your attention.